So, Kingdom Hearts 2 dropped on the PS2 in North America the same year Saddam Hussein dropped into the Lake of Fire after being executed. And despite how complicated the story of the series gets at this point, and how the platforming/exploration elements were dumbed down compared to the first game, the improved gameplay mechanics, goated magic system, and the plethora of memorable bosses definitely make up for it. So our story begins after being forced to play through a 3-hour prologue, or a 50-minute prologue depending on how good you are at the game. You take control of Sora, who just woke up after having all of his memories pieced back together by a girl who looks suspiciously like the Aryan version of his long-distance girlfriend, Kairi. Afterwards, you are told by Yen Sid to go on another mission to kill off the Heartless once and for all, in addition to killing off a new group of enemies called Nobodies. He also has to defeat Organization 13, a group of special high-functioning nobodies who join together for the purpose of collecting hearts in order to become genuine human beings. Kind of like how those aging, smelly third-wave feminists that I have locked up in my German torture chamber will occasionally join together to collect dirt and shit-covered rocks in order to satiate their nutritional values. Before I hit them in the face with my hardcover copy of Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul, of course. And finally, to once and for all, find King Mickey as well as Riku and Kairi, since Sora wasn't able to do that in the previous game. Or the GBA game that you probably didn't bother picking up because you thought it was a spin-off that had nothing to do with the main story whatsoever. Along the way, you'll destroy enemies and creatures such as a possessed Mongolian, furries, British people, feminists in real life, children trapped inside a cage, the fifth member of Korn, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as well as killing off new types of general heartless and nobodies, harder than a Democrat killing off the economy after becoming president. Eventually, Sora does come across King Mickey, as well as Riku and Kairi near the final parts of the game, and it's up to them to defeat the last few remaining members of Organization 13, as well as their leader, Xemnas, who wants to use the power of darkness to control Kingdom Hearts so that he can fulfill his goal. Why a moon-shaped rock in the sky has the power to do this, I don't exactly know. Kingdom Hearts, Chaos Emeralds, Dragon Balls, my alimony paperwork, these are all excuses to drive the plot at this point. So one thing that you'll notice immediately after playing Kingdom Hearts 1 is that it's nowhere near as cryptic. Gone are the Trinity limits and Dalmatian hunting side missions. And gone are all the hidden treasure chests and room puzzles that require you to check every nook and cranny. It is impossible to get lost in Kingdom Hearts 2 because talking to everyone you can inside the linear designed levels will give an obvious sense of direction. While some may argue that all of this takes away the challenge of figuring out where to go next, for me it just saves a ton of unnecessary wandering around, because spending an hour trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do to trigger a story progressing cutscene is like spending an hour trying to figure out why I keep getting calls from this bank in New York that says I'm a 40-year-old woman who owes outstanding debt. And anyone that has played JRPGs from the PS1 and PS2 era, or even the GBA and DS era, know exactly what I'm talking about. So if you tried playing through KH1 but got stuck after not knowing where to go next, KH2 makes things a little bit more straightforward. Like most action JRPGs, you're given a weapon, a magic system, as well as various other tools, like summons and ability add-ons at your disposal to help kill off mob fights a little quicker as long as you exploit their weaknesses. Obviously, you get more Keyblades, but instead of swapping them out for the newer ones with better stats like in the first game, each Keyblade in KH2 has a unique ability that can add new strategies for completing missions, defeating enemies, and grinding for experience. The magic has also been heavily improved as well. Stop and Gravity were spells that didn't really have much practical use outside of optional treasure chests, and there wasn't really much of a difference between spells like Fire and Blizzard. But in KH2, every spell is geared towards combat instead of optional bullshit, which is much appreciated. Besides weapons, magic, and ability modifiers, you also have access to limits, summons, and drive forms, which I'll briefly go over. Limits are basically super moves that every party member has, which consumes your whole MP bar. Some characters like Beast, Auron, Simba, and Tron have pretty useful limits, while characters like Mulan, Captain Jack, and Aladdin are pretty much useless. Sora, Donald, and Goofy each have limits as well, which you unlock as you level up. And since limits don't require you to have a full MP bar, smart players will use as much magic as they need to get some damage on a boss, or annoying mob fight, until the MP bar reaches just above 0. Then they'll select a limit from the command menu, and beat the ever-loving shit out of the X and triangle buttons, faster than the Flash and Sonic the Hedgehog surrogate bastard child. Anyway, summons are more useful in KH2 than in the previous game, so I'll briefly talk about them as well. The first one you get is Chicken Little, who's pretty useful for drawing in enemies if you don't want to use Magnet. I rarely ever used Genie, so I can't exactly comment on whether he's good or not, but Peter Pan / Tinkerbell are great, because Peter Pan helps you stagger enemies and Tinkerbell will revive you once per battle. Lastly, Stitch helps refill your magic and health bar, which really comes in handy on difficult boss fights. Moving on to the drive forms, they will slowly consume your drive gauge for the duration of you using them, and they each have their own specialty when it comes to attacks. Some rely on your strength, some with magic, some have special limits, and once you start leveling up each drive form, you get cool movement upgrades like a higher jump, dodge rolling, and the ability to glide. Just don't try to overuse drive forms too much, or else you'll have a high chance of ending up as Anti-Sora, which is a hidden form meant to punish players by blocking the use of magic and reaction commands for spamming. As far as the graphics go, Kingdom Hearts 2 is shinier than a diamond in a goat's anal aperture. With all the bright colors and particle effects going on, it's hard to believe that this was first released for the PS2. There isn't any frame rate drops at all, and if you're playing this on a PS4, everything runs at a constant 60 frames per second, minus the cutscenes, which are locked at 30 frames per second. I don't have much to say about the music because this is something that Square Enix has rarely ever failed on, but I'll just say that KH2 boasts some of the best music that Square Enix has ever pulled off. In short, I highly recommend Kingdom Hearts 2, as well as the whole series if you're a fan of Japanese action RPGs, or just third-person action games from the 6th generation of gaming in general. As long as you're willing to put up with a convoluted story in exchange for some very rewarding gameplay, and some cool moments, it'll be a blast. Just make sure that you're getting the final mix version, because it includes some gameplay tweaks and more optional content that didn't exist on the North American PS2 release. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to go to my sex dungeon.